Hi, my name is Simon. Welcome to a video for creative engineering. Actually, the final video you'll be seeing for creative engineering from me. And I'd like to talk to you about how to prepare for your final video assignment that you'll be doing. So let's get started. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the interview question you'll be doing, why you're doing an interview, and some general guidelines about how the task is best to do. I'm going to talk to you about the marking rubric so you know how you're marked and what I'm looking for. I'm going to give you some general video guidelines that you need to know and particularly about preparing and submitting your video interview as you need to submit to YouTube. To start with, lucky you. Unlike most interviews, you already know the question and it's in this lovely black box here that I'm pointing to. So basically, you're being interviewed for a trainee role as an engineer or designer or someone in those type of roles. You need to answer this question using the STAR-L approach. Now, the STAR-L approach is really important, and I'll explain to you what that means and how to do a good job. Now, in relation to this question, have a think about one of the most important things that you've achieved through your project and you're working in a team this term. Now, what I suggest you do is when you are interviewed in future, most of the time they're particularly looking at some of the interpersonal skills you have. So I suggest on my next slide that you focus on one or maybe two of these categories in your answer. So the question asks you to talk about what is one of the most important things that you've got through doing in this project. I suggest that you consider, maybe it's teamwork you talk about, maybe you're talking about your problem solving or planning skills, maybe it's talking about how you took initiative or developed leadership. In some groups, maybe you were the leader or you took some initiative to make very important decisions. My fourth point here, there's a chance to talk about how you've developed or used or displayed your interpersonal skills, potentially through dealing with conflict. Some groups went really well, some groups they might have been trying to kill each other. Here is an example, perhaps there's something dealing with conflict you could talk about if you're in one of those groups. The last one, you could certainly talk about being under pressure and working to deadlines and the skills that you developed through doing that. So I suggest that you consider one or potentially two of these categories. No more than that because you'll run out of time, I think. So these are some things you can talk about, right? Now, you may choose to talk about something else, but these categories, I think you'll find them helpful. So moving on from this, let's talk about why. Why are you doing an interview video? Well, in the future, when you're being interviewed for your role, when you become very near graduation, you are likely to be interviewed by a camera. So you will be asked a series of questions and you will need to record your answer via a web camera, and that will get sent to HR and they'll go through them. You won't actually meet anyone. You'll be recorded and speaking and interviewed by a camera. So I want to get you exposed to doing this now. This lovely slide actually shows probably the interviewer view of looking at these types of films and people answering questions. Normally, you'll be asked a question and it will give you a countdown and you have a certain amount of time to record. So guess what? You've got 5 minutes and you know what the question is. Like you. Moving on. Some general housekeeping about timing. So it's a 5-minute video. That means this one's a hard deadline. So we stop at 5 minutes, not 6 minutes, not 10 minutes, not 5 minutes and 10 seconds. We stop at 5. So bear that in mind. There isn't really a deadline for how short the video would be, but I'm thinking if it was less than 4 minutes, there's probably not enough detail. I would suggest you're around the 5-minute range, but definitely no more than 5. Deadline is on screen, 29th this year at 5 p.m. Upload to YouTube. My lovely little pointer here, if I shine this on the screen, you can't see it, but please remember, if I try and point to this thing, set it as unlisted, please, so that I can access your video. If you set it as private, I can't find it, and if you set it as public, well, Google can find you, my advice would be set it as unlisted. If I access your work and I can't see it, in general, I'll email you and you have a very short deadline of a couple of hours to fix it. I don't want to have time wasted by people who set it as private. So make sure it's unlisted. My advice to you is make sure that someone else can access your video. Send it to a friend, get them to check it to make sure the link is correct. You need to put that link in a document and submit to Learning at Griffith. You can find that submission document in the video interview folder on Learning at Griffith for the course. So go check it out. There's a Word document you download, you put the link in there and submit it to me. If you haven't uploaded to YouTube before, don't panic. There's some instructions in the submission document about how you can upload to YouTube. Trust me, it's really easy. You'll find it a lot easier to upload on campus. The campus connection, internet connection is fantastic. It'll upload really quickly. When I record these videos, I upload on campus, takes a few minutes. If I upload at home, I'll go away and make 10 copies and come back. So please, you'll find it safer to upload on campus if possible. Okay, let's go on from this. How are you marked? Well, there's 4 areas and they're not equally weighted. So you can see the first 2 are worth 13% and 12% respectively. Then it starts to get interesting, 25% for describing the work you've done, and big time, 50% for the clear reflection. And that means you need to use star L. So let's go through the rubric now. First off, let's talk about structured videos. So I've got the rubric here in front of me, just from good to outstanding. I've got 3 points there for you to think about. So please make sure your presentation is structured. It should have a clear introduction. And that means you need to introduce yourself. Tell me who you are. It's a bit hard when someone starts talking and, without an introduction. So tell me who you are. And don't forget at the end to say thanks. Something like that, so there is a bit of a conclusion there. My second point, your video is a really good chance to tell me about the outcome that you have from your project. And so it's a good chance to really tell the story of what you've been doing. And that's why my third point is that it's easy to understand and it's a good chance for you to highlight what you've been doing. All right? So I cannot stress enough, please introduce yourself. Remember to tell me who you are. It's really annoying when people start straight away without introducing. Okay, next. This is also really important. Think about how you have an engaging video, right? So that would mean you want to avoid being like my robot friend here. You don't want to have monotones or sound like a robot. So when you're presenting to me, think about your eye contact. Are you looking at me or are you looking behind you somewhere or at the ceiling perhaps? I mean, I want to be able to see you, so I should be looking at your face. Try to look at the camera as much as possible. You don't need to stare at me, but you do need to try and engage as if I was watching that video with you there. My third point, body language. It's okay to use your hands. That's not a problem. You can do that. And fourth point, speak clearly. Occasionally people will record a video that's not very loud. I mean, I have that trouble myself sometimes. Or they might speak or mumble, or so try and speak so that it's clear and I can actually hear you. The one thing that really drives me crazy is this. I don't want to see people reading a script at me. Think about it. If I'm interviewing you, would you read something to me? So you really need to, it works a lot better if you know what you're talking about. You're being interviewed, so you should be able to know what you're talking about. So think about how you don't sound like you're reading. I really don't want to see, I've seen this before where one person held their script in front of them. I don't want to see that. So think about how you can present. And if you think about it, if you know what you've been doing, it's very easy to explain. If you just sound like a robot reciting, that's not very confidence-inspiring. Moving on. Let's talk about this section, which is worth a bit more. Think about, tell me about the work you've been doing, but I've put your in capital there because I need to know what have you been doing in the project. True, you can talk about the fact that it was a group project and that you have been working within a group, and I'm sure there are things that happen within your group. but I need to know what you did. Occasionally in these videos, people will talk a lot about what their group did, and at the end of 5 minutes, I have trouble understanding what that person did in the group. So please make sure, yeah, certainly you can talk about the group project, you can talk a bit about your group, but I need to know what you did. I'm interviewing you, all right? So my second point here, be relevant to the question. It's always helpful if you're actually answering it. And the third point is a rather critical one. You can use image support during a presentation. And what that means is you don't need a PowerPoint. It's mainly your head and shoulders, and I'll talk about this again a little later, but you can use images of your work throughout your video at various times. So it might pop up and then go away again. I don't need to see images the entire time. There might be times when you edit the video and have an image come up, or sometimes people will hold something and they'll show it to me. Bear in mind though, you might want to make sure that if you're showing me something, it needs to be clear. Occasionally people will show something really small and I can't see it from the camera. So you may find it, you'll have to decide what works best for you, but it might be that you insert an image that pops up, or it might be that you hold something in your hand, such as a model or something like that. So think about images can help you a lot when you're explaining what your project is, and that's perfectly okay. You just don't need a PowerPoint the entire time. Let's look from good to outstanding. So in good, you've given me some idea of what you have been doing. And outstanding, it's really clear what you've been doing, and I have a really good understanding of your role and what you've been doing in this particular process of the design project. Moving on, let's move to the big one. 50, right, yay. So this one, you need to use the star L approach, and it needs to be clear you're doing that. STAR is a really good way to structure how you answer an interview question. Now I'll give you some examples of what STAR means, but I wanted to highlight some things on the rubric for you. So I've got good to outstanding. So at the good level, yeah, I can see you're using STAR to talk about what you've done, but there's not too much reflection about what that means for you in the future. Good to very good. Outstanding, very clear you've used STAR. You've talked to me a lot and you've really clearly shown how your skills have developed, and I can see how it's linked to what you're planning to do in the future. So that might be hard to understand right now until you see what star L is, which I'll talk about shortly. But my first point at the top, I suggest you focus on the one skill we talked about before. So choose from those categories and consider one, potentially two. The second point here, star L approach, it's got to be really clear you're using that. If you look at the rubrics later, you'll find that if I can't see that you're using star, you fail this category. You do not want to lose a ton of marks when it's worth 50%. So I think satisfactory is, yeah, I can see you're using star a bit. It's not completely clear what you've been doing, but fail is, I can't see any evidence of star L. So let's now talk about, well, what's star L? Next slide, yay. All right, so you can see here, star L stands for situation, task, action, result, learning. Now, you may see this as star without the learning. There are a number of alternatives to this, but this is the one we're using for now. It's a really good way of framing an answer to an interview question because it helps you clearly structure your thoughts. So my suggestion is, in the future, when you're interviewed for any role, have a think about how you can use STAR to structure what it is that you've done. Now, it doesn't work for every question, like tell me about this company. Well, it doesn't really work, but often a lot of questions are about you and your experience, and STAR L works very well for that, particularly when you're focusing on the skills you've got and what you can do. Moving on, let's have a look at an example. Okay. So situation. So here, situation is normally you explain what was happening, who, where, when, and that's where you can talk about, well, the project you've been working on, just to give me an understanding of where it starts. You'll find at the bottom, I've given you some text. This is an example from my experience a very long time ago, 88, I think, a long time ago. So I've given you a bit of an example about how I might talk about my situation. Now, after situation, let's go to task. So task, that's usually about, well, what is it you are trying to achieve? Or it could be, what is a problem you are trying to resolve? And this is a good chance for you to mention perhaps your responsibilities, or it could be the challenges you're experiencing, or whatever you're trying to do. So I've given you a long comment there. I'm not going to read that to you. You can look at the slides later. But there's certain things I was responsible for, certain things I was asked to do, and there was a challenge. So we've talked about situation, we've talked about task. Next, what did you do? What is the action you took? So this is what action is. This is a great chance to explain, well, what you did and why. It's a really good place to focus on, well, what actually you did and what were the actions you took. And that's how it relates to the skill that we were talking about before. So if it's group work issues and you're managing them, you can talk about that. If it's leadership, it might be something related to the leadership actions you took. Any of those categories, this is a great place to talk about that. So there's an example there for what I did. Again, you can read that yourselves later. Now, after action, I've done something. What's the result? The result, well, what happened? What was the outcome? So what happened? How did your actions influence the outcome? And that's something that's rather important to tell us what the result was. So I've given you an example there. You can also think about, well, what was the action, what was the result of the actions you took? Now, certainly, while the result is an important one, and that's often something people are looking for, the next one probably is where the real meat is, particularly when we're looking for evidence that there is reflection on what you've done. So let's have a look at learning. Okay, so this perhaps is one of the most important parts. So you went through a situation, there was a task, you did something, there was a result. So what did you learn from that that you can apply in later areas? So for an example, often a company wants to know what you did in the past and how you think you'll be able to apply that in their company. Or it might be when you're being asked to reflect, you might be thinking about, well, how can you apply that in a course? How can you apply that in your future careers? So these are things you want to think about. So I've got some points on there. Well, what did you learn? How did that help you develop personally? And you can also talk about, well, how might you apply that in future situations? And there's an example there of my own experience, what happened to me. Now, my examples probably won't be enough to talk about 5 minutes, but you have lots of things to talk about what you've done in the project, so you can communicate some of what's happened, and into that you can weave the situation, the task, the action, the result, and what you learned. So have a think about that. Moving on. If you'd like more examples, so I've got a link here to a resource, I think from the Health Service in the UK. There's lots of examples of STAR. Now, we've gone a little bit further in terms of adding the L for learning, but if you'd like to see more about STAR and how it works, and you might find that very useful in your own future interviews, check out the resource available at this link. You'll be able to find examples for lots of different questions and things you can think about. Moving on, let's talk about some of the errors. All right, so what I tend to find is people may not answer the question. So the question was asking about what did you do, and often people will talk a lot about the group and say nothing about what they did, so that would fit into the first category. It's very common in interviews too. People sometimes don't answer the question they've been asked. Politicians are very good at that. They don't answer their questions at all. Now, not being prepared, that one, perhaps it's not so relevant for this particular video, but if you're very reliant on a script, that probably means you're not very well prepared and you don't know what you're talking about. I think if you were reliant on a script in an interview, it wouldn't be a good outcome, let me put it that way. One other issue that can happen is perhaps too prepared, and that's when people tend to memorize everything, and when they speak, it comes out like sounding like a robot when I'm presenting, and that doesn't sound very natural. So you're looking for ways of answering the question that sound quite natural and demonstrate your role. Okay, moving on from this, let's look at some of the things about the video itself. So as a reminder, clear structure, I think I mentioned that already. Make sure you introduce yourself. You also need to conclude and say thanks. Head and shoulders. So although I'm recording the video like this, you don't need a green screen. I just need your head and shoulders, really. You don't need a PowerPoint. So if you're thinking, some of you who may be doing materials where you use a PowerPoint, I'm not expecting that. Head and shoulders, and like I mentioned, you can have image support when needed. You don't need images the entire time. So my third point, images. Use them when you need it. Sometimes it's really good and helpful in terms of visualizing the work you've done, particularly when it comes to modeling or showing your sketches or design. You can decide what it is that you want to show. A couple of other things. Sound is important. I need to be able to see you. I think someone one year submitted a video which was completely black, so I could hear them, but I couldn't see them. So please make sure that you are visible in the video. That would be helpful. I can't do anything when the phantom is speaking to me. And you don't need music. I did have somebody one year make some interesting choices of background music. You don't need that. So it's just I'm interviewing you. Just think about it like I'm sitting across from the table and I'm interviewing you. Okay, moving on. I'm going to give you some options for recording your video depending on your preferred computer system. So for those of you using Mac, iMovie is probably the easiest way. You can do it as well using QuickTime Player, and you can also use Monosnap. I think for about 5 minutes it's free. The links are all there. You can also use your phone or a camera or a device to record yourself. That's perfectly fine as well. I do sometimes find phones can be a little bit tricky with the audio, so just make sure that we can hear you afterwards. But again, I'm not looking for super technical production. You're not being marked on that. I just need to make sure that I can see you and hear you. All right. Let's look at Windows. There's a number of them. Ice Cream Screen Recorder, the link's there. I believe, again, it's free for around about 5 minutes. And then if you want more than that, there's pay features. So 5 minutes is all you need. Shotcut is free and it's very good. Cross-platform, I think. It's quite powerful. There is a link here for how you can use the camera app in Windows 10. If you're using Windows 10, that can also do reasonable video recording for what we want to do. So there are some options there. If you're really confused about this, send me an email and then we can see what we can do. But those are some options. Again, you can use cameras in your phone or devices or any other way of recording yourself. I just need your head and shoulders and I need it to be clear. Software is often easier because then you can add in pictures or images. Moving on from this, that's just briefly references. I wish you the best with the assignment. Make sure you go online and download the submission document to give me your URL. And please, whatever you do, remember to set it as unlisted so I can access your video. And I would suggest you get someone else to check it to make sure they can see it. That's all from me. Thank you very much.